we hear, and he began to teach them many things. I want to invite you to think about what you may have learned over the course of your life from the teachings of Jesus. And I sincerely want to invite you to think of that. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to ask you if there's anything that comes to mind that you can think of that you have learned from the teachings of Jesus. He is getting a reputation. And in this narrative, after he has sent out his closest followers to be able to do and to teach in the example that he has given them, this starts out with them coming back and telling him all the things that they had done. So there's this connection between the example that he had given them, what he had taught them, and actions that they had taken. This is not just idle language. This is not just rhetoric. This is not just theory that has no practical application. There is a connection between the teachings of Christ and them going out and seeing fruits and effects of the things that they were in turn sharing with others. The thing that is helpful for us to remember from time to time, as much as Jesus the Christ is this central figure of our worship and adoration, is that it's not all about him. It's a lot about him. He is at the center of our faith. But if it was only a cult of personality, just one man who did all these amazing things that nobody else could possibly touch, then when that man is gone, the gig is up. And maybe good for the people who got to experience him in their own lifetime, but too bad for everybody else. And so the question, what have you learned from the teachings of Jesus, is relevant. Because just as the apostles had that experience of being sent out and seeing those things that they had learned take hold and have multiplying effects in the lives of other people around them, so that is still the prospect that is held out to us. The teachings of Jesus are intended to be applied, not just noodled over intellectually, and then we get back to the other things in our lives that come from wherever they come from. So there is a lot of commotion around him. People are recognizing not only him, but they're recognizing also his followers, and there are a whole bunch of people turning out. And it says, as he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion for them, and he began to teach them many things. What turns out great crowds in our own time? The first thing that comes to my mind is entertainment. I think of celebrity concerts, and I think of big sporting events, and I think of the Olympics that is coming up in less than a week's time. I'm a little bit harder pressed to think about great crowds turning up to places where they can learn. It's not unprecedented. It's not just that that's not what comes first to my mind that means that people aren't motivated in that way. But I'm thinking about how people came out so that they could hear him teach and preach. What were they expecting? And so I wonder what has come to your mind. Last week I did a little bit of a pivot after the attempted assassination on former President Trump, and I asked you to share. And I'm going to ask you to share again this morning that question that I asked you in the beginning. What have you learned from the teachings of Jesus? Did anything come to mind? John?
Forgiveness.
Thank you. Yeah. Say again?
Healing.
Healing. Yeah. What have you learned?
Serving others.
Serving others. This is good stuff. Please. Faith in afterlife. Forgiveness, healing, serving others, faith in afterlife. These are things that can and hopefully have had an effect in a very tangible and real way in your life. One of the things that Jesus taught people in his own time was how to speak with God. I was in a conversation just a few weeks ago with somebody who told me about his continuing practice of meditation and how helpful that was in his life. Good. I was glad to hear it and glad for him to share it with me. And he said, and I've been also trying to add prayer alongside of my meditation, but I don't really know how to do it. What would you say to that man? If he asked you, how do you pray? What would you say? Would that come from your own experience? Is there some kind of tangible, particular way that you have learned over the course of your life as a follower of Christ that you could point to? This is how I talk to God. And of course, an example that comes straight off the page is Jesus teaching his followers the Lord's Prayer. That's a template. That's not an all-inclusive, all occasions, magical combination of words. But it does have some focal points within it about daily sustenance and about forgiveness and about deference to other people as well. And so then we can build upon that. And as I have liked to say and shared with this man as well, prayer includes listening. There was this time in which Jesus was at the end of his life and he's in this Garden of Gethsemane and he is pretty clear that the end is near and he's speaking with God and says this extraordinary thing, not my will be done but yours. Have you ever prayed that? Have you ever been in a situation that felt dicey, scary, uncertain? God, I'm hoping for this. Not my will be done, but yours. And then you got to wait. If that's a true and sincere prayer, then that implies that there is a certain surrender to God's leading in our lives. And so a part of what Jesus has taught us about conversation with God is that it's just not our words and then we get on with it, but it's in part what comes out of our spirits and then we stop and we wait and we listen. What have you learned from the teachings of Jesus? He taught us about blessing, but he taught us about blessing in a rather unexpected way. There's this part in another gospel called the Beatitudes, and there's all this blessed are sayings. And you may remember that most of them are not what you would think, or even probably not what you would hope for. Blessed are the meek. Pick me, I want to be the meek. Make me meek. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I've been aspiring to be poor in spirit since I was a little boy. Blessed are those when people persecute you and revile you for my sake, because that is what they did to the prophets. I would rather people compliment me. But there's all these teachings about blessing, not that this is the ultimate pinnacle in life to reach, to be meek and poor in spirit and to be reviled and persecuted, but because that's real. Because that happens in our lives. And because it was a reminder that contrary to some teachings about Christian faithfulness, even to this very day, that the only sign of God's blessing is not material and professional success and a perfect family beyond any appearance of anything out of line, but that God's blessing is with, and perhaps even especially with, those who are in places of life that are tenuous. So, what have you learned from the teachings of Christ, and has it made any tangible difference or effect in your life. Jesus was going around continually modeling the thing that he did with his disciples at the very Last Supper, which we participate in as a sacrament week after week after week, when he took that towel and he got down on his knees and he washed their feet, a ritual that is still very uncomfortable to most of us today. The idea of putting ourselves in a position of humility and having somebody else touch a part of our bodies that's uncomfortable, but it happened over and over and over again throughout his entire life when he was going into awkward situations with people who were not the most admired and respected. And he was communing with them. And he was inviting them to share their stories. He was sharing wisdom with them. He was offering healing. He taught us how to be in uncomfortable places with people who aren't our best friends and who think exactly like us. What would our world today stand to learn if more people knew how to do that with grace and facility? Be with people who don't think like them graciously, and to offer to honor that other person. In my singular opinion, we seem culturally to be getting worse and worse at being able to do that. We shy away from conversations that are uncomfortable or that might bring conflict because the other person might just go for the jugular. And yet, what did Jesus teach about being in relationship with those who are your enemies? Bless them. So this is wisdom that the crowds would have turned out for. And the reminder to us in this gospel passage is, we are the crowds. We are continually having the opportunity to turn out and be taught many things by Jesus. Not theoretical things, not intellectual things, but life wisdom that changes who we are and can be in the world. So I don't know what the last big crowd that you were in was and why everybody else was there. But it is worth thinking about what our own motivations are, what turns us out to gather with a lot of other people, and what we are hungry and thirsty for in our own lives. Entertainment is great, and there's an abundance of different opportunities for us to be entertained and to take in shows and concerts and all kinds of gatherings where other people are performing for our pleasure and delight. And let us also take time to turn out for wisdom, to turn out for being able to have our lives touched by the one who was sent into the world as the Messiah to change the relationship between humanity and God. That is what these people were turning out for. And it would seem to have stuck, because since Jesus insisted that it was not all about him, because he did not cultivate a cult of personality, but instead told others to go out and spread the good news that he had given them, look at how we're here 2,000 years later, still seeking that wisdom and that blessing, still coming together so that we can love our neighbors as ourselves, still serving other people, not for the ways that it will get us ahead in our own personal ambitions, but because it is following in the life's example of Jesus the Christ. That's the one thing that maybe is hard to find, at least in the way that culturally right now people interpret getting ahead. If one was to ask, what does Jesus teach about personal success? What does Jesus teach about building your brand? What does Jesus teach about enhancing your portfolio or getting ahead in the workplace? And it wasn't those direct points. What he instead taught was how to be in conversation with God, how to bless other people, how to be a servant of others so that our lives were enriched by the privilege and the opportunity to be a vessel of God in this world. And there are some who would argue that's the greatest wealth that you can build, is to be able to have an intimate relationship with God, is to know with complete assurity that you are blessed, and to be able to get up in the morning and give thanks that your life has the capacity to be a blessing in the world around you. If you have learned those things from the teachings of Christ, I would argue you are rich indeed. You have gotten ahead, and that you are a success. And so let us bask in the opportunities to be able to participate in those things, to be able to be taught many things by Jesus the Christ, and to be able to unleash that wisdom in our own lives and for the love of those around us. Amen.